Austin, if you don't mind.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is your first public hearing for adopting the millage and budget, as you pointed out, and this is just slightly bit more formal than the workshops, and so I just want to hit the high points of kind of the way we're going to proceed through this so that we can get this done correctly. The law does require that the first substantive issue that we discuss at these hearings is the % increase in the millage rate over the rolled back rate that we need to fund this budget, and the reason for that increase. For this budget hearing, millage hearing today, there is an increase. The proposed budget is funded at last year's millage rate of 2.5194, but that is 4.83% greater than the rolled back rate, which is 2.4033. And the rolled back rate, as we've talked about before, is essentially the millage rate that would, at this year's value, produce the same amount of revenue as last year's millage rate at last year's value. And so our millage rate is slightly higher than the rolled back rate because we did have a fairly good increase in taxable value from last fiscal year. That increased tax revenue, combined with some other expenditure reductions and other revenue increases and things like revenue from state revenue sharing, has been used primarily to fund the addition of 2 full-time school resource officers to the police department, as well as some other enhancements to the police department, such as tuition reimbursement that we talked about back at the workshops, a proposed salary increase of 3% for all employees, and an increase of 6% in our health insurance rates, which actually was an improvement from what we originally thought. At both this hearing and your final public hearing, we have to adopt the millage rate ordinance first before we adopt the budget, and they have to be done by separate votes. And again, these are public hearings, so take public comment and have the public speak and ask their questions about the millage and the budget before you adopt those, but it should be specific to those 2 items. And then finally, before you actually adopt the millage levy ordinance, if you don't mind, give the city clerk a chance to read sections 1 and 2 of that ordinance into the record after your motion and before the vote. And with that, I guess I'll give it back to Tammy to open up the millage hearing.
An ordinance of the City of Vero Beach, Florida, providing the levy of ad valorem taxes for the fiscal year 2018-2019 at a millage rate of 2.5194, which equates to 2.5194 per 1,000 of assessed property value.
2.194. Okay, so the time we will take public comment on this particular matter?
However you'd like to proceed. Again,
Yeah.
This is the millage rate that we had last year and the millage rate.
Any public comment on the millage rate this year? Yes, sir.
Hello, council members. Brian Hetty, Vero Beach, Florida. And I'm on the ballot. For your job. The millage rate assesses the ad valorem tax, and that this year is $6.8 million, something like that. You've got an electric issue that is being held up for numerous reasons, but the City Council has the ability to close on October 1st on the Indian River Shores portion, which is $30 million. There's nothing stopping you from doing that, and if there is, I'm all ears. Tell me. If you close on the Indian River Shores portion and put that $30 million into our treasury, you could take $7 million of it, and every city taxpayer could have a tax-free year. You could take $7 million out of the proceeds and pay the ad valorem tax, and you could reduce this millage rate down to 0 for this year. And the taxpayers would get a break for a change. And if there's some reason why you couldn't close on Indian River Shores and do this, why don't you explain it to the public? And I remember Councilmember Moss talking over and over again about when the inclusion of Indian River Shores as a separate portion of the sale, when that was included, over and over and over again, she said, and this is in the context of a wholesale. Okay, that's fine. Then let's do that just exactly like your former mayor said, in the context of a wholesale. Let's close the portion October 1st. Does lots of things. What it does for the ad valorem tax is it puts a load of money into the treasury, and you wouldn't have to charge city residents, any of them, any ad valorem tax at all this year. You'd have it on the proceeds of the sale of a portion of the electric utility that the city taxpayers built and paid to maintain through their rates. We built it, we maintained it, it's an asset owned by us, it's not your private little gig. I've looked through and have been a part of the discussions in the electric utility. If there's a reason why we can't close on that portion on October 1st, give the Indian River Shores residents the relief that they wanted, and at the same time, give the taxpayers of the City of Vero Beach a tax holiday, and they wouldn't have to pay any ad valorem tax this year. And is there any council member that knows any reason at all why that couldn't be done?
Because we're for the full sale?
This is done when council member Moss was mayor, and this provision was put into the terms that are currently binding. I think those terms end on December 30th. But anyway, this was put in there as a precaution. So it's not a question of being against a full sale or for a full sale, it's a question of getting the sale done. And sometimes you have to do things incrementally. So your only reason is that you're for the full sale. Nobody's preaching to be against the full sale. So does anybody know of a reason why we couldn't close, give Indian River Shores for $30 million their territory back?
You would summarize, please, Mr. Heady.
And do you have a reason? Can you explain why we couldn't do that and give the taxpayers a break?
The partial sale is, in my understanding, it's a contingent upon the full sale failing. We don't want the full sale to fail. That's what it is. But I think your time's up.
My time is up, really?
That's what
3 minutes.
When did that happen, Mr. Zidane?
When he asked you to
When the
summarize.
alarm went off at 3 minutes.
This is a public hearing, Mr. Zidane. There's no time limit. Just, I know you're a new council member, but that's kind of like the rules. There is no limit on it.
Thank you, Mr. Heady.
Anyway, is there any council member that can give me,
Your time's
or the
up.
public,
Please take a seat, your time's up.
there's no time limit on this public hearing?
Yes, actually, it's 5 minutes on agenda items.
On the tax?
Agenda items is 5 minutes.
Okay. I thought there was a special rule that involved the hearing on tax, and that there was no limit.
I've not heard of that rule.
No, the time limits are established by council, and their time limit on agenda items is 5 minutes.
But we're not here to discuss the limits at this
Okay,
time.
well, no, I wasn't here to discuss the limit anyway. You and Mr. Zidane's brought it up. I was here to discuss why we couldn't take $30 million of the taxpayers' money and give them some of it back and
you've
close
done a-
part of the deal.
You've done a great
And no
job.
council member seems to be wanting to give an answer to that.
If I may,
Yes.
on the sale process, I would recommend that you talk to our attorneys that are representing us in that case. As you know, we're going through the PSC, and there are some folks that are involved in the PSC issue. So I think the sale should be discussed.
Should be, it's not part of this discussion tonight.
Of course it's part of this. It's
Mr. Heddy,
the
your
ad
time is
valorem
up, sir.
tax,
Please
which is
have a seat.
affected by the amount of money
Mr.
that we
Heddy,
have.
you're out of order.
Yeah, the only one's out of order is you, as usual.
Mr. Heddy? Thank you very much.
Just for the community to know, there are 3 complaints that were filed with the Public Service Commission that are still outstanding, and Mr. Heddy filed one of those complaints. And I think what Mr. Clement and what Mr. O'Connor are referring to is that we should not engage in conversation about it because it's a legal matter, and our counsel will be speaking for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Moss. So at this time, do we have any other public comment on the millage rate? Okay, this is where it's going to get fun for Mayor Howe. It's my understanding, Ms. Lawson, that at this point I can make a motion for the millage rate, and then we'll have Tammy read it in, and then we can take a vote. And now you tell me if I'm doing this correctly. So I'm going to make a motion that we approve, that the City of Vero Beach approve the rollback rate of 2.4033. The percentage is 4.83 above, greater than, yes, sir?
I'm sorry, don't we need to read section 1 and 2?
Yeah, and just to clarify, what we're proposing is a millage rate of 2.5194, which is in Section 2 of this ordinance. And that millage rate does happen to be greater than the rolled back rate by that percentage. So, yeah, I guess the question is the motion to adopt the ordinance as presented, at the millage rate in the ordinance as presented, or would there be some other millage rate that
No,
that we
the
would...
motion would be to adopt the millage rate as presented. Yes, ma'am.
I'll second that.
Well, I think, and now do we have,
And before the vote, allow Tammy to read that section into
thank
the
you.
record. Perfect, thank you.
Section 1, the City of Vero Beach, Florida shall levy a general ad valorem tax of 2.5194 mils against the value of all real and tangible personal property within the city limits subject to taxation on the first day of January 2018 to finance current operating expenses of the city. The tax shall be assessed and collected in the manner provided by law. Section 2, the fiscal year 2018-2019 operating millage rate of 2.5194 levied hereby is greater than the rollback millage rate of 2.4033 mils by 4.83%.
Thank you, Tammy.
right, and now I would ask for a second.
You have one.
If you had a second.
What?
You have a second.
We have a second? Yeah. Okay, all in favor?
It takes a roll call.
It takes a roll call.
Dr. Zidans?
Yes.
Colonel Young?
Yes.
Councilwoman Moss?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Sykes?
Yes.
Mayor Howell?
And yes for me.
Passes 5-0.
So we'll move on to the budget.
Okay, the second is an ordinance of the City of Vero Beach, Florida, adopting the annual budget of the city for the fiscal year beginning October 1st, 2018 and ending September 30th, 2019, appropriating funds for the operating expenses, supplies, and personnel, and otherwise appropriating funds for the efficient and effective operation of the government of the City of Vero Beach and its departments. Such appropriations being from anticipated revenue, providing a means to amend the annual budget to carry forward the funding of purchase orders, work orders, and grants outstanding as of September 30th, 2018, providing a means to amend the annual budget to reflect grants received after September 30th, 2018, and authorizing the transfer of funds appropriated so long as the total combined appropriations shall not be increased thereby, providing an effective date.
Okay, and Cindy, you have to input?
I do. My comments will actually be shorter than the title of the ordinance, but, what you have in front of you is the proposed budget for next fiscal year, and we did have an extensive discussion about it at the city council workshops, but just to highlight a couple of things that have been done since then and things that we incorporated at your direction at the workshops. It does have the 2 school resource officers in it. It does have some other enhancements to the police department. It has a salary increase of 3% for all employees across the board, which which was made possible by some increased state revenue sharing in the general fund after the time that we had the workshops. We got some estimates for increased revenue. The health insurance increase is 6%, not the 12 that we had thought it might be, which is great news. And also, as we discussed at the last City Council workshop, this budget takes into account the fact that we would be running the electric utility for the first quarter of next fiscal year, which is something we didn't have a chance to talk about at the workshop because we were still on track at that point for October 1. And so this incorporates those changes we talked about at your last City Council meeting, increases in some transfers from the electric utility, for instance, related to revenue, decreases in some transfers of sale proceeds, but the bottom line remaining the same at 2.5194 for a millage rate. And just as another comment, the salary staffing spreadsheet you see attached to this one is a little different. It shows the first quarter and then the way things would look after the sale of the electric utility in the second quarter. One more thing of note that we did based on your direction at the workshop was we addressed the proceeds from the sale of the post office. We put them into that capital construction fund in Fund 304, and we set them aside for the lateral E drainage basin project, and we added that project back to the capital projects at your direction. And so with that, I'm happy to answer any other questions you might have about this budget, or just recommend it to you for adoption, or ask the city manager if he has anything he'd like to add.
Does anyone have any questions for Ms. Lawson?
Thank you.
I have a question, actually. I think it'd probably be for Mr. Clement, and this is with regard to the marina, and I expressed this during the budget workshop, and for the community, what is part of the budget is to pay off the debt on what is referred to as the South Complex. Remember, the municipal marina is protected by Section 5.05 of the city charter from sale or transfer or lease of any kind, but the South Complex, which is where the insurance company is, and also where the dry dock and the boat repair is, that is not protected. And this money, if we pay off the debt, my understanding is we are not saving anything on the interest. We are, in fact, paying the interest, or what would be the interest for the entire period of time, but we're going to pay it off. I'm concerned that it will then become unencumbered property, and by that I'm referring to the South Complex, and then before you know it, it'll be for sale. So I don't want to lose control of that. And my question for Mr. Clement, or whomever would be the appropriate person to answer it, is if I am not in agreement with this part of the budget, I'm in agreement with the rest of it. So would I vote against the budget then, because I don't agree to this repayment of the debt service?
Well, the budget as a whole is what would be adopted as presented, unless there's 3 votes to make a change in anything in the budget.
But to keep in mind, as with many things that are in this budget, which are our plan, the actual execution of these things, for instance, contracts for $1 million, they have to actually come back to you as City Council to get authority to do them when the time comes.
Okay, thank you.
So having them in the budget doesn't necessarily mean that this is your last chance to weigh in on it. If it's large enough, it'll come back to you before the action is actually taken.
Because any payoff of that would have to be approved by the council.
So that will be a separate vote then?
Yes.
Okay, all right, thank you.
And normally that gets run by the Finance Commission as well, anytime we do anything involving debt. So having it in here doesn't mean you won't see it again.
Okay, thank you.
I just have, my only concern is that when we did our budget hearings, we initially had, the initial budget that was prepared had 2% raises across the board for all employees. And during the budget hearings, we as a city council decided that there was a specific need to pay police officers 3% instead of 2%. And legitimately, because there is, particularly with a lot of police officers going to become school resource or officers, it's hard to fill all those positions. We need to have a starting salary that's reasonable for those employees, and we also have vacancies in our police department that we're looking to fill. So it's important that we have attractive salaries that people can come in, which I was totally in favor of. Between the time that we did our budget hearings, though, and now, the decision has been made to extend that to the entire, all the city employees, that 3% raise. And my concern is that as part of the beginning of our budget process, what we did is we looked through and we have like a plan over the next several years that we're going to use some of the proceeds from the electric sale, $2.5 million in the first year, $2 million, $1.5, $1 million, $0.5 million over the next 5 years. And that transition means that going forward, we have to be very cautious, and we're going to have to find how are we going to continue to make those transitions over the next 5 years. So, and the reason that that was given for why we went for across the board 3% raise for all employees was that we got some additional funding from the state, revenue sharing. I understand that the money's there, but that doesn't mean we have to spend it on that. Instead, what we could do is, instead of 2.5, we could use 2.4 this year, and now we're closer. It's not as much to cut the next year. And I just think I think it's a bad idea to change from what we had planned at the budget hearings, and I would ask that we handle it that way.
Can I interject real quick? As you know, these budgets or proposed budgets by the city manager, which is what I put forward, and Dr. Zidans, as you and I talked about, my problem is not just recruiting in a police department. I have problems, for example, a water plant operator is a very important and a certified position that we also have a hard time in recruiting. We have a hard time in sustaining our rotation of employees because of the same thing. Our starting salary across the board is not competitive in many cases. So what we're trying to do is to try to keep the whole organization at that level that the city council wants in order to provide those services. And it's not just to spend the money, it's because I think they are very deserving in doing that, and so that's where we're going.
Well, I would just say that when we went through the budget process, we decided as city council that was the appropriate amount, and then because we found an extra source of money doesn't mean that we should change the plan. I think that we should be as fiscally conservative as we can. If we really feel like we want to spend that money there, I would much prefer that it would be in the form of a bonus rather than an increase in base salaries, because it's much harder to control base salaries, or you're going to put yourself in a situation in the future where we're going to have to cut staff, okay? And so when you increase the salaries, you're putting at risk future jobs as well. It's my opinion.
And I agree, and opinions, obviously from your perspective is respected from my, but at the same time, I've got to recruit employees, I've got to recruit qualified folks, and I've got to make sure that we have the workforce momentum to keep the jobs going. And in my opinion, singling out 50 employees out of the organization and giving a pay raise, even though you're right, police officers are very important. I go back that it only takes one spill into the river from the wastewater treatment plant, and that certified person becomes very, very important. And the other issues that we have, the time that we can't find anybody to get on the mower for Riverside Park is another. So we're looking at this as trying to be competitive in order to carry out the services. Again, it's like laying sidewalks. You've got to have qualified people to do that if we're going to do it in-house.
Councilman Zudans, I agree with your fundamental premise here, but I also respect the many years of service that Jim and the experience that Jim has with this sort of operation, running of a city. So I for one, am going to be for just continuing with the budget as presented here today. Anybody have any discussion about that?
What you just said is really what I think is appropriate. I mean, the future, we all know, we will have to look at the quality of life of Vero and make decisions according to that, but the preferential pay increase, I think, would be something that would not be well advised, so no.
So, do we need public comment at this time? Anyone want any public comment on this matter? Seeing none, I will make a motion to approve the budget as presented.
We have somebody coming forward.
Do what?
You got someone coming?
Oh, we do. I'm sorry.
Hello, Mr. Mayor.
Hello.
I have my usual flag shirt on. It's hard to believe you didn't see me. The salaries for employees and bonuses are easier to handle than salaries, easier to take away than salaries. But Jim O'Connor, the city manager, says that our salaries are not competitive across the board. And there's a constant refrain about how wonderful Vero Beach is and the quality of life in Vero Beach. And I can tell you that the quality of life for employees that are paid substandard wages, that are paid wages that aren't competitive, quality of their life is probably a lot different than the quality of life of the council members that live over on the Barrier Island. And there's very few that rise to have a word about the underpaid employees. There are an ample number of employees on city payroll that make pretty good salary. And in fact, their salary is often put up when conversations arise about how well off city workers really are. But that's not the case for all of them. And anything that can go into this budget that brings the salaries of those who are at the low end of the scale, to bring them up so that their wages are competitive, is something that council members should look at. When I sat on city council, I had a particular gentleman from the Taxpayer Association that used to chastise me on a regular basis and tell me that my job as a city council member was not to stick up for, not to protect city workers, that my job was to protect the taxpayers and the citizens. The city workers are citizens. The city workers are taxpayers. So, yeah, it is your job to look out for those. And you should, as a city council member, you should be proud of the fact that your city pays decent living wages to every single employee in the city. So if you want to change the budget at all, let's not do what Mr. Zidane says and kick those raises out, maybe give them a little bonus, or, you know, a little tease here and there. If you want to change the city budget, I've got an idea. Change it to where every single person that works for this city, every single person that's in our employ is making a decent living wage.
Thank you, Mr. Hardy. Any other public comment on the matter? Seeing none, I'll make a motion to approve the budget as it's presented. And Tammy?
Is there a second?
Second.
Dr. Zidane?
Yes.
Colonel Young?
Yes.
Councilwoman Moss?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Sykes?
Yes.
Mayor Howell?
Yes. Okay, and we'll adjourn this meeting at this time, and we're going to take a 5-minute break. We have a few people that need to get prepared for the next meeting, which is the regular scheduled city council meeting.